little bit of, well, a lot of bit of information, okay? So how do we know that that is in fact what we ate? You know, how do we know that it was meats, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds? How do we know that it wasn't just an all vegetable-based diet versus, the other argument, how do we know that it wasn't all just a meat-based diet? Other than the obvious, because, right, there was no cereal then, right? I mean, that kind of stuff kind of showed up within the last 150 years or so. Kellogg's and right here in Michigan and stuff like that. So how do we know that we didn't eat that stuff? Well, one, it didn't exist. It wasn't there. And it's pretty easy to say we ate meats, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds because that they were there. But what percentages and how do we know where they came from? The anthropologists really have answered that question. Okay, so they do isotope research on bone density, okay, from fossils found of that era, okay? So, well, how do they come up with the ratios? Well, how do they come up with the ratios is they'll look at something that was distinctly carnivore during that portion of evolution, look at their bones and their isotope profile. Then they'll find cow skeletons, herbivores specifically, look at what their isotope profile is and their bone density, and then cross it with what we had. Okay? So they can find patterns in isotope configurations, and if you go to that Max Planck Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology, that's actually in Germany. I hope to go there next November because I have to go to Europe to speak. Oh, this is going to be so fun. And I want to swing by there and interview Mike Richards, but if you go online, there's a whole ton of research on that, but in a nutshell, that's what they're doing. So they're basically taking a pure carnivore, they're basically taking a pure herbivore, they're crossing these things over and trying to find out where we fell in the middle. And it actually comes to find out that we were way more carnivore than they thought. Okay. So, on to the next example. How do we get fat? So we talked about glycemic index a little bit and glucose being an issue. That's me. Look at that. There's more Dunlap, right? So, you guys have heard of the glycemic index before, right? Or you've heard it mentioned before. Here's a perfect example from, this is actually a screenshot from a friend of mine, Tom Naughton, great guy. He did the movie Fathead. If you guys haven't had a chance to see that movie, I highly suggest buying it. And the reason I say highly suggest buying it is not only because I like Tom, but the DVD extras on this movie are just as good, if not better than the movie. And Tom hates when I say that, but it may be better than the movie because it's the interviews with the doctors and the PhDs and professionals not taken out of context. So you've seen movies where you get a blurb of a doctor saying something real quick, blah, 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 and you're like, well, I wonder what was the sentence before that and what was the sentence after it. The DVD extras let these guys just talk. It has a couple of my science heroes on there, Mike and Mary Dan Eads, as well as a couple other real prominent heart people, some of the people from the Framingham Foundation, which are all about the saturated fat foundation and stuff like that. So, but anyway, back to my slide here, the glycemic index. What that was is basically, for those of you who don't know, is Dr. Mindell did an experiment testing blood sugar levels after ingesting particular foods. Okay, so, and he arranged a score. If it was pure glucose, it got a score of 100, and then he would have I think it was over 100 people ingest various items in a fasted state and check blood glucose levels, and then assign a value to those things. Okay, so you can see in that chart there that regular old table sugar, which is 50% glucose, 50% fructose, a lot of people don't know that, yield a number of 64, where a Coke was actually a 63, but one of that good marketing stuff there, that cereal and that bread at the end, would yield a score of 67 or 70. I'm going to shoot holes in the glycemic index real quick because it didn't incorporate how your body reacted with other foods, though, too. It didn't incorporate a whole plate of food. Okay, so there's a hole there. It also doesn't incorporate the glycemic load. And a glycemic load is actually how much you ingest. So if you say my can of Coke versus my bowl of cereal, that would be one scenario. But I remember as a kid eating 2 and 3 bowls of cereal That would be your glycemic load. Okay, so it didn't spike my blood sugar fast, but my body still has to deal with 3 bowls of cereal now. Okay, and that's like the standard American breakfast, right? Throw your kids a bowl of cereal, a Pop-Tart, and a glass of juice. No wonder they're ADHD and bouncing off the walls, right? Of poor teachers, I have no idea how they deal with that. And then they get to class or to lunch, and they got Doritos, Mountain Dew, and I got to remember to put this slide back in there. I went and met my son for lunch. I have a cooler over there on Fridays that says healthy snacks, and they're Hershey. I mentioned a name. A very popular manufacturer of ice cream bars, and it says healthy snacks on there because they've incorporated a percentage of fruit in them. So now they can say they're healthy snacks. And pizza, by the way, is a vegetable serving because of tomato sauce, if you guys didn't know that, in the public school system. So what's the problem with that? Well, at a systemic level or at a blood level, sugar is very toxic. Sugar in your blood system is very toxic, and that's why your body works so quickly to try and get it down. And for those of us that are not metabolically resistant, we release insulin and we hurry up and shuttle this stuff away. Does everybody know what an average blood glucose level is? Hey, there we go. 80 to 100, somewhere in there. Okay. It's not uncommon to find people who are metabolically damaged to get in the upper 100s. And I've had some friends that have told me, mine's down to 250. And I'm like, down to 250? Hey, take you to the ER, like right now. And it's very, 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 very toxic. So this is where the problem starts with gaining weight or weight gain. Okay, so whether it starts its life out as a natural, whole, healthy grain or that can of Coke per that previous slide, it's going to have to deal with that glycemic load. And whether it deals with it fast or slowly, it's still going to have to deal with it, and it's going to have to release insulin. Insulin is a hormone that's going to deal with these cells that's going to shuttle this stuff away. Another thing that it also does is we have elevated insulin levels. Insulin is also our storage hormone. And it'll store the triglycerides in adipocytes, or fat cells. Okay? So as insulin levels are high, shuttling all this sugar out of our blood system, it is also not letting energy be released from our fat cells. And over time, remember how we made that comment before, that, I got to my 20s, I could eat whatever I wanted. I got to my 30s, not so much. I got to my 40s, I got a little pudge, what do you expect? I got to my 50s, I got a full-blown Dunlap. That's something that gets abused and metabolically damaged over time. Okay? It's called insulin resistance. Okay? And it won't let anything else happen. It also won't let your liver produce any type of glucose. So elevated insulin levels over time inhibit fat loss. So I wish I had a little whiteboard in here. I could draw you guys some good graphs, but maybe I'll shoot a video on it and post it on my YouTube channel. If you constantly keep your insulin levels elevated by constantly incorporating some sugar, you'll never be able to lose that weight. Our body naturally stores about 2,000 kilocalories of glucose, okay? And actually, it's only like 4 or 5 grams in a teaspoon of sugar or glucose that you need for your whole systemic blood information, blood levels. So to get an example of that, and then turn the label over on something to see how many grams of carbohydrate are in there. So insulin resistance, okay, we just talked about this. Some of the issues that we have with insulin resistance is hypertension, diabetes, elevated triglycerides, and obesity, which is becoming a pandemic in this world. Okay. Another thing that happens with elevated insulin levels over time is your body stops listening to leptin, which is another hormone that tells you, hey, I'm full. So if you're eating more and more insulin responsive foods, you're making yourself more and more leptin resistant too. And over time, your body won't listen to that. That's why a lot of times you can pound cake like it's going out of style, but you can't do that necessarily with steak and broccoli because there's not that elevated insulin response blocking leptin telling you stop. We don't need to talk about that. Ghrelin is another hormone that, as you had elevated insulin levels, that's going to inhibit ghrelin, which is actually going to cause that to. It's like another hunger hormone. Okay, so here's another good illustration from Tom's thing, and I'm going to step away here so I can talk about this a little bit. So, if you have, this is a blood vessel. This is fat storage. You have elevated insulin levels. We're going to talk about this common or mostly recommended dietitian or dietetic guidelines right now, as well as what the doctor will tell you how to lose weight. So you're eating a standard American diet or eating off that food pyramid, and you're eating what they're recommended, natural, healthy, whole grains, moderate protein, and you're exercising, and exercise more, eat less, exercise more, right? Okay, so you've downed your calories, except you stay to that particular food pyramid that has a lot of carbohydrate with it. So you're exercising more, working up an appetite. Has anybody worked up an appetite before? Okay. But you're lowering your calories. So you just did 30 minutes on the treadmill, and then you go have a bowl of steel-cut oats or something like that, because that's a trendy oatmeal to have. You spike your insulin levels, and you're starving at a cellular level because it's not letting anything else, and you cut your calories down. You worked up this appetite. You've decreased your calories. Insulin levels high because of the foods you ate. Can't release any of the stored energy from fat cells. Your body really has nothing left to do but downregulate your metabolism. We have a lot of natural mechanisms built into our body to keep us from starving. Okay? We spent most of our evolution starving. Feast or famine. It was mostly famine a lot of times. We have a ton of these mechanisms built into us to keep us alive. Okay? So right off the bat, your body's going to try and save itself, so it's going to downregulate your metabolism no matter what you're doing. And then at some point, you're going to be so hungry, you're going to fall off that bandwagon and go back to what you know, which is a high carbohydrate diet again. And now your body's going to be downregulated of its metabolism. You're going to introduce all this carbohydrate. It's going to have nothing to do but store it. This is a horrible process. This is what's been recommended for almost the last 30 or 40 years, and it's not working. Look around. It's not working. Okay? So what do I do? What is there? Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so we talked about it in the beginning, the difference between a Paleolithic diet and a ketogenic diet. And I'm going to say it again. The Paleolithic or natural human diet is foods we ate during almost all of our evolution. Okay? Meats, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Luckily, most of those don't invoke much of an insulin response, unlike refined carbohydrates. Breads, which is man's first processed food, right? Egypt controlled the grains, controlled the world. Nutritional ketosis is a state in which there is a metabolic shift from utilizing sugar, glucose, as cell's primary fuel source to utilizing fat, ketones, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetoacetate. You get to this point by adjusting your macros. Okay, your macros are going to be, and we're going to talk about that in a second, fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Usually you're limiting your carbohydrate, and this is not for everybody. This is cookie cutter part here, okay? You'll find your way as you go. The cookie cutter part of this is usually under 50 grams of carbohydrate a day. We'll talk about what those are in a minute. A moderate level of protein and a higher level of fat. We'll switch your body over from that alternate metabolic pathway. Okay, so here we go. Before we go any farther, I used to assume this part, but does everybody know what macros are? What fat, protein, carbohydrate, protein. If you flip over the back side of almost anything, it'll have its nutrition value on the back. Okay? And that usually consists of fat first, carbohydrate, and then protein. Okay? For those of you who are not used to looking at that, start doing that. Start being conscious of that. I actually developed an app this year, and I actually did it while I was on Jimmy Moore's last low carb cruise, which I highly recommend. That was a lot of fun. They developed this app while I was on the actual ship because there was over 200 people in that audience, and a lot of these doctors and PhDs were talking at such a level and had them so sold, but they didn't know some of this basic stuff. So I developed an app called Keto Check to help get the real newbies started. Okay, I got an Apple on Android. And what you can start doing to learn your way on this is if you flip over that nutrition label and type these things in, it'll give you a quick pie chart right off the bat, and you can see almost at a glance whether this thing is going to follow under that ketogenic guideline. If you're a little more seasoned in this, I got a new version of that coming out real soon, Keto Check 2.0. It's going to be a little more robust. And I'll talk about it more at the useful tools at the end, but you'll be able to check a whole plate worth of food at a glance too. It has a database built into it. It'll be real easy to use. I hope it's real easy to use. We're still in beta testing on that, but my goal is to help you with this thing, and I'm going to keep it at 99 cents because my real passion here is making sure you guys get helped and learn. So, what is a ketone? It is a source of energy for our bodies that we don't commonly use. During our evolution, we used it a lot. Like I said, we were mostly in a state of starvation a lot of times. And to paint a little better picture of that is I already did the dairy one, right? Okay, so most of you, maybe not, have walked around in the woods before, right? Now eat. Right? So maybe if you were lucky, squirrel, rabbit, some berries if it was the right season, right? You might find some vegetables if it was the right season. You know, that stuff isn't yearly. Even in the warmer climates, that stuff isn't year-round. You guys always watch like that National Geographic channel where the lions take something down. You know, they're right into it. No one's stopping and making a plate. Right? No one's stopping and making a salad, a side of this, side of that. Okay, so they are actually made in the liver. I always like reading these because sometimes I tend to generalize too much. They are made from the liver, from fatty acids, and chemically they retain some similarities to the fatty acid from whence they come. However, being much smaller molecules that are water soluble, making them easy to transport in the blood, more like simple sugars whose functions are a part of what they're trying to replace. So if you go into any physiology book, you will see, well, you know what, they're starting to write some of it out of there, but some of the older ones, you'll see both of these pathways side by side, a glucose pathway versus a ketogenic pathway. And I can post that up underneath here. Actually, I did, didn't I, under the events page. This shows the two metabolic pathways. Both are very acceptable pathways for our body to utilize. And I'm going to argue that the ketogenic one is actually the preferred one, because what I have noticed being in a state of nutritional ketosis, even with my retraining, is that you recover way faster being keto adapted. Your body produces less CO2 per calorie burned, so you actually get a pH drop, and you also produce less lactate. Not to mention that the mobilizer of ketones is monocarbolic acid, and monocarbolic acid also mobilizes lactate. Okay, which is, you guys heard about being lactic acid and being sore and stuff like that too. So you also burn more stored fat. Why do you burn more stored fat? Because traditionally your body can only hold about 2,000, actually that's my next slide, I should probably wait a second. So you'll burn more stored fat and you'll carry less water because the whole metabolic process, because of producing less CO2, needs less water. You'll have more stored energy. Okay, so your body can only hold about 2,000 kilocalories of glucose. That's with the liver and in its cells. Okay, your body can hold over 40,000 in stored fat. Some of us weigh more than others. Big fat Italian Jamie had plenty. But if you were to put yourself in a state of nutritional ketosis, you'll actually be able to utilize those a lot faster. A good example of that is there any runners in here? Anybody familiar with running a marathon or some of the side effects of running a marathon and bonking? for a long, long time, and it's starting to shift finally, I've noticed in some of the running blogs and stuff like that, is they'll say to carb load, carb load, carb load, and then they do all these gel packs and stuff like that. What they're trying to do is draw out that 2,000 kilocalories of stored sugar. But inevitably in 23.2, am I right? 23. Well, a lot of miles, you're going to run out, right? Power lifter, not runner. You're going to run out, and then you're going to bonk. Which bonking really is doing is switching over to nutritional ketosis on the fly. And then that's where they get that boom lightheadedness from, okay? So switching over to a state of nutritional ketosis, and I'm starting to see more and more runners do this, is you'll actually avoid that bonk and be able to just run right through. Okay, so if you start the race there, you have no problem, switching over because you're already there. Here's some information. Have you guys ever... All right, there's the key. Okay, so have you read Finney's Low Carbohydrate Performance book? Okay. This is a screenshot out of there, and they did a lot of this stuff.